hypertrophy, just theoretically, could occur in the absence of additional incremental strength gain.
But you could train other ways, get the same growth, and not have the same strength adaptation. So I don't know how you prove that one through study design. It's nearly impossible.
But I thought you would be a really interesting person to talk about the narrative that has been going on. So just to clarify for folks a bit, just from a high level, the dose-response relationship our model suggested for the effects of additional sets on additional strength gains, it plateaued somewhere in the 5 to 10 sets per week range. Whereas for hypertrophy, there was not a clear plateau. You could make an argument for like a functional plateau, maybe around 25 sets, maybe around 30 plus sets. And then, like you said, Sam, there's just not a ton of data up there. So you could even make the case for maybe even a little bit lower. But ultimately, the dose response relationship is stronger for the effects of volume on hypertrophy. So what some people have landed on, and I don't want to just like present this in a way to dismiss it to your point. And I'll also say that I'm not going to put all my cards on the table quite yet, because I think Zach and I need to give that an individual segment in the future once we've really discussed it deeply, because I think it deserves that attention. But ultimately, the thinking goes something to the degree of, okay, if beyond, say, 5 sets per week, we're not consistently seeing increases in muscle strength, how is it possible for there to have been concurrent increases in hypertrophy or additional hypertrophy that occurs? And even though you're not, and therefore it must be swelling, or it must be something else causing the increase in muscle size. And the reason I think you're such an interesting person to get just like your stake in the ground, or at least your general thoughts here, is that you have extensive experience with Jeremy Lenicky, who is popular for noting that changes in muscle size are not necessarily indicative of changes in muscle strength in the research that we see in these short-term studies. So this just opens up a whole can of worms, and we're kind of returning to this old debate that has just been going on for decades and decades, and is kind of repopularized recently as a result of that. So I guess I'm curious, because we don't have a ton of time here, just to get your general take on that line of reasoning. And again, I'm not saying swelling yes or no. I'm just saying, is that a reason to bring up the question of swelling, or is that fundamentally flawed? And before I kick it to you, Zach, have something
One
quick
quick clarification, just so I'm trying to steelman that as much as possible. They would not make the claim that they are perfectly correlated by any means. It's much along the lines of, if I know for a fact that hypertrophy occurred, there must be additional force production to show for it, is essentially the claim, I think. So not that they're perfectly correlated by any means.
Yeah, I think I've given this a lot of thought, and I think I've come to a conclusion. And my conclusion, this is just what I think, and I share this with my class, and I try to get what they think on this too, get them to try to fight me on it. I don't think in 8 weeks, muscle growth is ever doing anything meaningful for strength. It doesn't mean that muscle growth isn't meaningful for strength, but over 8 to 12 weeks, I don't think it's doing anything. And I challenge anybody, and it's, I would love for them to show it. I keep trying to show it through study design, and I can't. Muscle growth, having muscle growth over 8 to 12 weeks never leads to more strength than not having muscle growth over 8 to 12 weeks. So it's a reality of the literature. I'm fairly confident that muscle growth in the literature that we're all familiar with is never playing a meaningful role in strength. And again, it doesn't say in the book, it doesn't conclude anything other than over this time period, you could have had the growth or not had the growth. I think your strength adaptation would have been exactly the same.
Here's a quick clarification question. Sorry, we only have a short amount of time, and I'm very curious about this. Yeah. Would you say the same for load progression within their rep ranges? So that would be like a strength assessment, which I think is mostly what the meta is showing. Would you say the same about load progression, like progressive overload, evidence thereof?
If it's not a 1 or M.
Correct. Like the training loads that they're utilizing, or the reps they're performing with a given training load in their actual 8-week intervention.
It's hard to separate that one from specificity, but you could train other ways, get the same growth, and not have the same strength adaptation. So I don't know how you prove that one through study design. It's nearly impossible. That's just a function of how you train, and the functional adaptation you get along with how you trained, right? So that one's tough, but again, you could design 5 other arms that you could manipulate it to get growth and no strength, a lot of strength, no growth, the same strength, with less growth. Like I think you could design it to show whatever you wanted to show. And again, the thing that remains to be demonstrated is that a group that has growth gets more strength than a group that doesn't over 8 to 12 weeks. And I think the reason that nobody seems to be able to produce that data is because you just can't. And that's why I think, again, I know I keep saying this, and it's so impossible to do. We need 6-month studies. We need 12-month studies. Like, and maybe we can find the point at which you can no longer get stronger unless you have growth. These studies are so difficult to do. It's a huge investment, and you need your design to be right in the front end because you don't want to waste your time. But I'm fairly confident that growth does nothing meaningful for strength over 8 to 12 weeks. And
so you would push back against that general line of thinking that I presented, that hypertrophy just theoretically could occur in the absence of additional incremental strength gain.
Hypertrophy could occur without incremental strength gain.
Additional hypertrophy could occur without additional strength gain in these 10-week studies.
This is one that makes your brain explode, right?
Because typically it's like the other way around almost. That's why I said I'm not putting all my cards on the table, because I want to give it the attention it deserves and not be flippant with it. Because
we're stealing Sam's notes.
Yeah, exactly. So we're stealing your notes for a future podcast episode.
And I know we're short in time, but we did Matt Jesse's dissertation was 90 reps per set at 10%, 15% on 1RM. We did not employ progressive overload. And we saw growth. I'd have to look back at if strength increased.
Yeah.
But we purposely did not employ progressive overload because it would interfere with our research question, because if you did, eventually the weight would get up to being 30%, and we wanted to see, can a weight that's so low that you're not really disturbing the blood flow and the mechanical compression is much less, can you still get growth? And if you can't, can you overcome that with blood flow restriction? And again, I can't remember. I mean, we didn't see anything impressive for strength, and we didn't employ progression in any sense, really. The only thing you could argue is that no, that would be the opposite, because some of them were failing before they got to 90 reps at the beginning.
Yeah.
But by the end, they could do all of the repetitions.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Josh, and it sounds like you got something cool you're working on or that you have. But again, in a certain scenario, it makes sense. In others, maybe it could be challenged a little bit.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair take. And yeah, just to very briefly respond to that, I think there are plenty of reasons why we would question, especially the upper end of the dose-response relationship. We've mentioned a few throughout the show. That one, at least where I'm at right now, isn't all that convincing for multiple reasons. For example, just basic model uncertainty. Like, I think people underestimate how easy it could be for additional data or slight differences in statistical methods for it to instead be a very sharp plateau, instead be a very gradual and albeit small, but additional strength gain as sets go up. So like
also just completely different data sets too. That's
and then the big hitter that people miss is that they are different data sets. They're a lot of the studies that informed the strength dose response did not also have hypertrophy data. So we're kind of like trying to draw these connections with indirect links, basically, which is kind of it can be hypothesis generating for sure, but really the best way to look at it would be to use studies that measure both hypertrophy and strength, which we hope to present here pretty soon.